If there's one thread that runs through the tapestry of human history, it's the conviction, expressed in 1,000 tongues and lived in countless traditions, that our lives are bound up with the lives of others. Strip away the differences of geography, ritual, and language, and you find the same intuition rising again and again. The way you treat another human being is the truest test of who you are. You can hear it whispered in desert tents under the burning sun of the Middle East. You can find it etched into the tablets of ancient lawgivers in Mesopotamia and carried in the oral wisdom of desert prophets. You can trace it in the rice paddies and river valleys of Asia, where sages and teachers passed it from student to disciple like a flame. You can discover it in the oral traditions of Africa, where proverbs remind the living that their fate is tied to the community, not the solitary self. You can hear it sung in the chants of the Americas, woven into the stories of the Lakota, the Maya, the Inca, the Cherokee. Reminders that to harm another is to wound the web of life itself. Cultures separated by oceans and centuries, people who never once met, still came to the same insight. We cannot live well without living well with each other. In Christianity, it emerges in the Sermon on the Mount, spoken to a crowd of peasants and outcasts. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In Judaism, centuries earlier, Rabbi Hillel summarized the vast complexity of law and tradition in one radical line. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. In Islam, the Prophet Muhammad told his followers, "Not one of you truly believes until you wish for others what you wish for yourself." In Buddhism, the Dharmapada distills it with clarity. Hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. In Confucianism, which sought to order society around harmony and virtue, the same principle appears. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. And beyond the written traditions, in indigenous wisdom across the globe, the same pulse beats. Among the Lakota, the teaching of Mitakuye Oyasing, all my relations, reminds us that every being is kin, and to harm another is to harm oneself. In the Maori world, Whanaungatanya emphasizes kinship and reciprocal care, affirming that life is always shared. In West African traditions, the concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, captures the same reality in different words. The Golden Rule is not a Western idea, not an Eastern idea, not a religious monopoly or a philosophical curiosity. It's a human idea. The language changes. Some traditions phrase it in the negative. Don't harm others in ways you would hate. Others phrase it in the positive. Actively do for others what you would want done for you. But whether cautious or bold, defensive or proactive, the essence is the same. Morality cannot stop at the edge of your own skin. A life well lived means carrying your concern outward, letting your compass point not only inward, but also toward the other. And that makes the Golden Rule extraordinary. It's not just a religious teaching tucked into one sacred book. It's not the property of one prophet, one culture, one moment in history. It emerges independently, again and again, as if humanity were rediscovering the same law written into our very being. It's as if the rule lives deep within the architecture of conscience, waiting to be uncovered whenever people pause long enough to ask, what do I owe another person? The Golden Rule is a solvent. It dissolves borders. It bridges differences. It slips past the walls of creed and culture and reveals a startling truth. Beneath all the costumes we wear, beneath all the flags and rituals and philosophies, we share a common intuition. The dignity we claim for ourselves holds weight only if we extend it outward. If humanity has ever stumbled upon a universal law, this is it. Not physics, not mathematics, not even language, but ethics. The law that how we treat others is inseparable from who we are. And yet, if the golden rule is so obvious, so universal, why does it so rarely feel like the air we breathe? Why does it shimmer as an ideal in our texts, but vanish in our daily lives? The problem is not that we fail to remember it exists, but that we remember it selectively. Somewhere along the way, humanity began attaching footnotes and escape clauses, clever little exceptions that let us admire the rule without having to obey it. Do unto others, as long as they belong to my tribe. Do unto others, unless they threaten my status. Do unto others, provided it doesn't cost me too much. We are masters at carving out exceptions, bending a universal principle until it snaps into the shape of our fears, our prejudices, our convenience. History is littered with examples. Christians in 18th century America could recite Jesus' Sermon on the Mount while building economies on the backs of enslaved men and women. They quoted the Golden Rule in church pews on Sundays, then returned to plantations on Monday, convinced that their skin color exempted them from its reach. Buddhists, heir to a tradition of compassion, have at times justified violence against rival sects or ethnic groups, claiming that outsiders fell outside the circle of compassion. Nations born on the promise of equality have drafted constitutions declaring dignity to all, while quietly writing laws that exclude immigrants, indigenous people, women, or the poor. Even in the smallest corners of ordinary life, we twist the rule into something more palatable. A worker treats colleagues with respect, unless promotion is at stake. A citizen advocates fairness, unless their taxes might rise. A student preaches kindness, until social standing is threatened. In each case, the golden rule is treated like a tool of reciprocity, a kind of polite bargain. I'll treat you decently if you treat me decently in return. But that was never the point. Reciprocity is safe. Reciprocity is easy. Reciprocity is essentially a contract, nothing more than enlightened self-interest. True empathy, the kind the golden rule demands, is not contractual. It's unilateral. It asks us to go first, with no assurance that the gesture will be returned. It's not contingent on whether the other person deserves it by our standards. It doesn't stop at the borders of our religion, our nation, our class, or our political party. It doesn't depend on whether the other person likes us, or even whether they respect us. It simply says, act as though their humanity is as real, as untouchable, as sacred as your own. And that is precisely why people forget it. Because that kind of ethic is demanding. It costs something. It requires us to give without guarantee, to risk without reward, to extend dignity even in the face of indifference or hostility. It asks us to love the stranger, forgive the enemy, defend the vulnerable when no one is watching. It requires us to step out of the safe territory of politeness and into the risky terrain of compassion that may never be returned. And so across time and culture, people have found ways to dull the edge, to tame it, to domesticate it. We turn it from a revolution into a rule of etiquette, from a radical reorientation of human life into a polite suggestion, fit for greeting cards in children's classrooms. We declaw it, because in its raw form, it threatens too much. But the golden rule, in its raw form, is not polite. It's not a slogan for nice people. It's dangerous. It's disruptive. It's radical. Because it breaks down the categories of us and them. It refuses to let us put limits on who counts as our neighbor. It demands that we redraw the boundaries of our concern until there are no boundaries left at all. And that is why it is quoted far more than it is lived. Etched into stone, written in the holy text, sung in hymns and inscribed on monuments. Yet, almost always, as an aspiration, admired at arm's length, not a principle obeyed at full cost. We like the sound of it. We just don't like the demands of it. And it's not just individuals who stumble over the golden rule. Entire systems, governments, empires, corporations, churches recoil from it. Because if you take this principle seriously, if you truly believe that every other human being deserves the same dignity, fairness, and freedom you claim for yourself, then the scaffolding of hierarchy begins to tremble. You cannot treat someone as a servant and still claim the right to rule. You cannot justify slavery, segregation, or caste. If the humanity of the oppressed weighs as heavily as the humanity of the privileged. You cannot hoard wealth while others starve, if their hunger matters as much as yours. You cannot build an empire on conquest if the lives at the edges of your borders are as sacred as the lives in your capital. The golden rule, when lived without loopholes, erodes the very foundation of privilege. It whispers in the ears of kings, "You are no greater than the farmer who tills your soil." It confronts the master, "You are no different than the one you call slave." It unsettles the ruler. The governed are owed the same liberty you demand for yourself. It mocks the billionaire, and so do I. The janitor's well-being counts as much as your own. If this ethic were embraced without exception, whole social orders would collapse overnight. Feudalism would unravel. Colonialism would be unthinkable. Racial hierarchies would dissolve. And economic exploitation would lose its moral alibi. The golden rule does not politely reform a system. It strips it down to the studs and asks, why do you imagine yourself above anyone else at all? And so, institutions have learned how to manage it. They quote it, but only in diluted form. They praise it, but only as a sentiment, not a policy. They bury it beneath layers of doctrine, ritual, and bureaucracy. They smother it with conditions. Love your neighbor, but only your neighbor. Treat others as yourself, but only if they belong to your kind. In practice, they teach people to shrink its scope until it no longer threatens the pyramid of privilege. Because a world where the golden rule truly reigns is a world where dominance cannot survive. And that is why it is remembered in words, but forgotten in deeds. For those who benefit from inequality, the golden rule is not simply inconvenient. It's destabilizing. For those who wield power, it's not a gentle reminder. It's a sword at the root of their authority. It's not just a moral suggestion, it's a threat. The most dangerous ideas in history are not complicated. They're simple, almost embarrassingly so. Treat others as you would want to be treated. 9 words that could undo empires. 9 words that could topple hierarchies that have stood for centuries. 9 words so incendiary that institutions have spent generations sanding down their edges, disguising them as etiquette, turning revolution into courtesy. But make no mistake, the golden rule in its pure form is not polite. It's not safe. It's not comfortable. It's a force that asks the most subversive of all questions. What if no one is above anyone else? That's the part we miss in modern life. Somewhere along the way, the golden rule was domesticated. We shrank it into a gesture of manners, a line on a classroom poster, a reminder to be nice. We confuse it with etiquette, remembering to say please or thank you, smiling at the cashier, holding the door for someone behind us. All of that is pleasant, even good, but let's not mistake courtesy for revolution. The golden rule is not about politeness. It's about radical empathy. Radical because it refuses to play by the rules of exclusion. Radical because it rejects the borders and barriers we use to ration compassion. Radical because it refuses to let us sort people into piles of deserving and undeserving, neighbor and outsider, friend and enemy. Think about how expansive that really is. The golden rule insists that the stranger on the other side of the world, someone you'll never meet, someone who doesn't speak your own language, someone who prays to a God you don't believe in, belongs inside your circle of concern. It insists that the refugee at the border, exhausted and unwelcome, is as entitled to dignity as the citizen secure in their home. It insists that the prisoners in a cell, the addict in an alley, the rival across the aisle, the opponent you'd rather defeat than understand, all of them matter, equally and without condition. It even insists that the person you most resent, the person you would rather erase from your life, has a humanity that is just as real as yours. That's uncomfortable, because real empathy means more than feeling a moment of pity or sadness. It's not a flash of emotion. It's a reordering of your moral universe. Radical empathy means seeing the other person's humanity as fully equal to your own, which carries obligations. If their suffering is as real as yours, then you cannot look away, even if it's easier to change the channel. If their dignity is as valid as yours, then you cannot trample it to preserve your comfort. If their joy is as worthy as yours, then you must celebrate it, not resent it, not dismiss it, not envy it. And that changes everything. It changes how we think about politics, not as a contest of tribes clawing for victory, but as the responsibility to govern for the good of all, including those who did not vote for you. It changes how we think about economics, not as the endless maximization of profit, but as the duty to ensure that no one is abandoned to hunger, homelessness, or despair. It changes how we think about community, not as a fortress built to protect our own, but as a recognition that there is no our own that does not include every human being. Radical empathy destabilizes the categories on which modern life depends. It resists the easy narrative of us versus them. It undermines the indifference that allows cruelty to flourish in silence. It asks us to see the migrant child, the unemployed neighbor, the elderly stranger, the political adversary, not as abstractions, not as statistics, not as enemies, but as people whose lives are bound up with ours. That's why the golden rule, properly understood, is not a courtesy. It's a revolution. It tears down the fences of apathy. It refuses to let comfort excuse complicity. It calls us out of our tribes, our ideologies, our insulated bubbles of self-interest, and insists that we face the world as one shared human story. To live by it is to make the most audacious claim possible. Your dignity is as real as mine. Your suffering is as urgent as mine. Your joy is as worthy as mine. No exceptions. And if we were to believe that, if we were to live as though it were true, our world would be unrecognizable. Strip away the layers, peel off the doctrines, the dogmas, the debates that divide. Set aside the temples, the rituals, the arguments about who is right and who is wrong. Imagine taking every religion, every philosophy, every system of thought humanity has ever built, and reducing it down to the studs. What would remain? What would be worth carrying forward? It wouldn't be the hierarchies or the rules about food or the chants in forgotten languages. It wouldn't be the theological blueprints for the afterlife or the endless arguments about the nature of God. It wouldn't even be the creeds people recite by heart but rarely live by. None of that endures when tested against the basic question: does this help us live well together? There is, however, one principle that does endure, a single thread, strong enough to hold the whole human story together. Treat others as you would want to be treated. That's it. One line, one ethic, one commandment that needs no altar, no priest, no law to enforce it. Because if you live by this, the rest falls into place. Justice is not a mystery. Compassion is not complicated. Peace is not impossible. They are simply the natural consequences of living as though someone else's humanity is as sacred as your own. And the reverse is true too. Forget this rule, and it doesn't matter what else you cling to. You can build cathedrals and carve idols. You can memorize scriptures and compose philosophies. You can invent entire political and economic systems. But without this, it all collapses into hypocrisy and hollow words. The irony, of course, is that the golden rule is almost too simple. It doesn't dazzle. It doesn't mystify. It asks for no secret knowledge, no initiation rite, no elite training, which is why people overlook it. Humans love complexity. We love loopholes, hierarchies, technicalities, debates. But the golden rule refuses all of that. It stays embarrassingly plain. Treat others as you would want to be treated. That's it. And yet, if we really remembered, it would change everything. Wars would be harder to start. Exploitation would be harder to justify. Indifference would be harder to maintain. Imagine a world where policies, businesses, families, nations were built on that one ethic. Imagine a world where empathy, not profit or power, was the baseline assumption. It sounds naive, until you realize it is the most practical wisdom that has ever been given. If there is one creed worth keeping, this is it. Not because it belongs to any one religion, but because it belongs to all of them. Not because it's lofty, but because it's livable. And if enough of us are willing to live by it, not just quote it, not just admire it, but practice it, the world would be unrecognizable.